Then in the early hours of September the 1st, German soldiers dressed in Polish uniforms attacked a radio station on the German side of the border, leaving behind some bodies. This was the aggression which Hitler later used to justify his attack. At 8 that morning, German troops pushed aside the Polish frontier barriers and mobile forces raced forward. Two days later, on September the 3rd, Britain and France declared war, honoring their promise to stand by Poland. But by then, the Poles were in deep trouble. They were not only outnumbered, but facing a new form of warfare for which they were ill-prepared. Blitzkrieg. In 1939, the German army consisted of 1.5 million men. Its elite were the panzers, tanks, 6 armored divisions and 4 light divisions intended for reconnaissance, a total of 2,400 tanks. These had been designed to break through an enemy's defenses and strike deep, cutting communications and spreading confusion. Enemy strongpoints would be bypassed, left to the following infantry to mop up. The new German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was also designed for Blitzkrieg. It had 2,500 aircraft lined up against the Poles. The most notorious was the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber. It was a form of flying artillery, making pinpoint attacks in support of the fast-moving ground forces. The Poles could muster just 600 planes. On the ground, it was just as bad. Poland's army was just 500,000 strong. It had only 880 tanks. It even had 11 brigades of cavalry, lances and horses against armor. But it wasn't just numbers that gave the Germans their advantage. They used their panzers in a radically new way, as separate, hard-striking units. The Polish tanks were dispersed to support their infantry. The Poles' task had been made even more difficult by the German takeover of Czechoslovakia. The west of the country, including the capital Warsaw, was now surrounded on 3 sides by German-controlled territory. This geographical advantage was essential to Germany's grand plan. The task of the first thrust of the tanks was to create an initial breakthrough. But actually winning the war depended on deep pincer movements designed to surround and crush the enemy. These would come from Army Group North under General Fedor von Bock. He would launch 2 thrusts from northeast Germany and East Prussia. Army Group South under General Gerd von Rundstedt would launch 2 more from Silesia and Slovakia. The aim would be for the pincers to meet near Warsaw and Brest-Litovsk. From the start, it went well for the Germans. The Polish Air Force was effectively eliminated within the first 2 days. Panzers cut through and struck deep. And the Stukas and medium bombers proved devastatingly effective. The Poles were sliced apart, pinned into pockets which yielded vast numbers of prisoners. Legend has it that some Polish cavalry units gallantly tried to attack the panzers, but it was futile. They were just brushed aside. It seemed that nothing could now stop Guderian. He plunged on, further and further into France. By the 19th, his lead units were past Peronne. On the 20th, in an extraordinary 56-mile dash, Amiens had been taken by lunchtime. Abbeville, just 14 miles from the English Channel, was seized by 9 that evening. And at midnight, a battalion of the 2nd Panzer Division reached the coast at Noyelles. The Germans had split the Allied front in two. Everything now depended on whether they could defend this long, thin corridor, or whether the Allies could successfully counterattack. So now the British got ready to break the German lines. On May the 21st, 2 armoured battalions prepared to launch an attack south of Arras. The British tanks were even more unsuited to fast-moving armoured warfare than the French. Their most effective machine, the Matilda II, had been designed for infantry support. Though well armoured, it was slow and undergunned. The Germans had little trouble in repulsing the attack. But it did have an effect. By now, the German High Command were becoming worried by their extended lines of communication. So, for the time being, driving south into the rest of France was put on hold until the infantry had caught up. The priority was to turn north and eliminate the British Expeditionary Force and the French First Army fighting beside it. On May the 22nd, Guderian and the panzers began their attack to destroy the Allied armies. These were now pulling back to the ports of Boulogne, Calais and Dunkirk, but they were trapped. On May the 23rd, General Alan Brooke, commander of British II Corps, wrote, "Nothing but a miracle can save the British Expeditionary Force." 2 days later, the Germans seized Boulogne. It was beginning to look as if even a miracle would be too late.